Hello, everyone. I am Corion, your witch in residence here on YouTube. And a couple of years ago, I ran into a group of pagans that instead of using Greek mythology or English mythology or Norse mythology or Egyptian mythology, they used the mythology built around j.r.r. Tolkien's work, The Lord of the Rings, for their mythology. So instead of, say, for example, the sacrifice of Prometheus, which I might turn to, they would speak about the incredible weight on Frodo as he carried the ring. And it really got me thinking about, does this work? Or how would this be accomplished? And what I wound up doing is I wound up sitting down and not only doing a very deep dive into the concept of creating a mythology, which Tolkien freely admits was his goal initially, to what impact that would have. And I really sat down, I really thought about it. I'm actually going to do probably a month of, Lord of the Rings pieces and my personal takes on them. But before we get too deep into that, I just wanted to say to all my subscribers, thank you very much. It's really appreciated. If everyone who is viewing would please consider leaving a like, going ahead and sharing this out, or if you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. As well, we now offer channel memberships, which will allow you a say in how this channel runs, so please consider doing so. And now, with that obligatory ritual out of the way, let's go ahead and discuss The Lord of the Rings. So, initially, like I said, I thought this was a little weird, right? We know that these stories are not real. But I then sat down and really thought about it. And I don't know if they necessarily have to be real, because these kind of mythology is not necessarily stories that are untrue or don't have a ring of truth to them, but rather stories that would not fit well into the, historical record that serve as a groundwork for a culture. And I think you could safely argue that if there is an underpinning to pop culture, Lord of the Rings is probably a very, very solid column in that underpinning. Now, so we've established it's possible that it could be a mythology. Okay. Now let's start taking a look at the important lessons or stories that mythologies always contain, right? Mythologies always contain warnings about strangers. Well, we have the ring wraiths. Okay. They always contain a guide to ethical behavior. Well, we have that with Frodo's discussions with Gandalf. They always contain fantastic allies and enemies. Well, we have the fantastic allies in the elves and dwarves and what have you. And we have the fantastic enemies in terms of the orcs and the goblin kind. We have intense magic, interactions with the mythology, right? We have the supernatural elements are all there in Tolkien's work, but more subtle than you would see in some of the more fantastically charged mythologies, like Arab mythologies or African mythologies, or several different versions of Asian mythology where it seems the supernatural was simply just part of daily life. So we have the components, we have the core pieces of the puzzle. Now, there's a lot of cultures that claim their mythology to be real. For example, Christianity claims the mythology laid out in the Bible to be real. Judaism does the same with the Torah, and of course, Islam does the same, with the works of the Quran. Now, I am not saying in any way, shape, or form that they are not real. Okay, what I'm saying is that's the claim made. So we can't really do that with Lord of the Rings, right? We know it is not a true story. But I submit to you the question is, does it really need to, right? Do we need to believe that the trials of Heracles actually happened to take inspiration from the story, right? Do we absolutely need to believe that Thor was out killing frost giants with his mighty hammer that he throws? I don't think we necessarily need to. At least not to gain the lessons from it. Now, there are some people who will absolutely believe it is real, and that's completely fine, right? There's nothing wrong with believing that, and that's where I think the holdup is going to be on this Lord of the Rings mythological debate. Is you'll get the hardliners that believe that, for example, with the Vikings, that that Odin was a dude that happened to be roaming around the countryside and was a god, right? And that's okay, right? What I am saying is that for a large population, it's the message behind the words that carries the truth, as opposed to necessarily the factual dates, times, and locations of said truth. Because at the end of the day, the message, what we take away from the story, is far more important, right? It's a parable. And the great thing about parables is the way you can tell it's a good one is when you read it, you find more information at deeper levels. And I do think The Lord of the Rings has that, right? We have Tolkien scholars that have dedicated their work to reading this person's material in a very similar way to a rabbi. The only difference is a Tolkien scholar is not expected to lead their community, which, I think in a lot of ways is a fair bit of a shame, because some of these Tolkien scholars are very dedicated, would be very influential in the world of pop culture should they step forward. I believe Mr. Shippey, who was one of the original consultants to Amazon for the Lord of the Rings project before it got out of control, I think he, would make an excellent leader among the community. So, we do have this, right? They do tick all the boxes, and the only piece I can stick to is, but it's not real. And then, I keep coming back to, but does it have to be? And I don't think the answer is, I don't think it has to be. I think what matters more is the lesson, right? I think what matters more is we read these stories, we read these pieces of pop culture we consider mythology, and we say, what lesson can I draw from this, right? I always point to Stranger in a Strange Land as a more modern take on the New Testament. And, I realize that kind of creation of a mythology is not that hard, right? It's not that challenging so long as it touches the core components of the soul, which is what we really, really need from our pop culture, is to touch us deeply and to make us think deep thoughts about the nature of things like self-sacrifice and major political issues of the day. And, also that sense of adventure that comes from something new and something fantastic, and embracing the wonder that these stories tell. So, I think if we're going to have The Hobbit, or, The Lord of the Rings, or, the Silmarillion as a background to our Western pop culture, this isn't too bad a background to have. Let's take a look at what it's teaching us, right? Fellowship between your brothers, right? regardless of what they look like or who they look like. This is a very noble pursuit, and I am very much in favor of it. It's teaching that through adversity, we find out how strong we can truly be. We get various discussions of the concepts of mercy and compassion and empathy, right? We see people acting honorably and nobly and going forward, not because it's the thing that will, provide them wealth, but because it's the necessary thing to do, and they recognize that, and they have the capability to do it. And then you have, some of the side characters in the story who we see are either just happy with the world or are fighting to change it in their own way and doing everything that their society will allow. This is a tale that I think ticks all the mythology boxes, and I think is worth considering from a perspective like that. I would actually challenge every one of you to take a look at your mythology, what you believe, if you're in any way religious, or even just the stories from mythology that have inspired you, and then watch through or read The Lord of the Rings and see if you can find parallels to those stories. I would imagine you can probably find them very, very easily. I would imagine that the descent into the mines of Moria could be likened to the descent of Inanna, okay, or the descent of Persephone. So, or even the descent of Balder, right? So we have these possible connections there. And I think there's an important underlying reason for that, and that's mythology told by humans to humans is going to have universal truths for it. There are things that we all universally believe and connect to, right? We all universally believe in treating others with respect, until, of course, given another reason, and treating, and how to treat friends, right? How to be respectful to one another, and that it's important to do so. To be wary of outsiders until you get to know them, right? To recognize when, you've exited the realm of the daily and into the realm of the uncanny. I think all of these things are important, and I think all of these teach important, vital lessons. And you know what? I don't think I've told this story on here yet, so I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys a completely textbook example of what I mean by relating to a mythology. As some of you may know, I studied fencing for a great number of years, and during a very, very silly training accident, which I will not go into in depth, I was actually stabbed through the knee with a fencing saber. I was rushed to the hospital. They removed the blade and patched me up fairly well, to be perfectly honest. But the first words I heard when I opened my eyes were, "Well, you're never going to walk again." And it took months and months and months of physical training, of working. And there were several points where I hit really, really deep lows. And I remembered this story from mythology. Tyr, the Norse god of battle and the protector of the Asgard, lost his hand while they were attempting to bind the Fenris wolf, the wolf that will end the world. And the gods were very nervous because without Tyr's sword hand, they were in trouble. So, because the existence of the Fenris wolf was actually Loki's fault, he reached out to, the gods reached out to Loki and said, "You got to fix this." So Loki contacted the finest smith in all the world and had him create an artificial hand that Tyr could strap on and use. And Tyr would complain that it hurt his arm, or, so he went back to the blacksmith and had it adjusted, or it chafed and had him adjusted again. This kept going for 3 or 4 times, and then Tyr finally admitted, look, when I fight with this, it's not me fighting, it's the hand fighting. This isn't me using that sword. So Loki took it back to the blacksmith and said, it's got to be defective, this is why. And the blacksmith nodded solemnly and said, come back in 2 nights, and I will have this sorted. So in 2 nights, Loki comes back and is handed a box. And the smith says, now don't look in the box. Just take this to Tyr. He will understand. Loki takes the box to Tyr. And Tyr is sitting there with this wooden box. And he opens it. And he nods. And he smiles. And out of the box he takes a single cuff to cover where he lost his hand. And puts that on. And starts to train with his left hand. And this story really inspired me because, yeah, my knee had some problems, but that didn't mean I couldn't overcome them. It didn't mean I couldn't move beyond them and become greater than what I've been. And no, can I professionally fence anymore? No, I can't. Okay, but I walked out of that hospital, and I'm walking every day because of this. So this can be done. Okay. These stories of mythology can inspire greatness, okay? And I think that is the most important thing mythology can do. Now, do I know for certain that this conversation happened between Tyr and Loki? No. Do I need to? No. Do I accept the truth of it without it being real? Yes, right? And that truth is that sometimes you're going to get hurt. And it's not what you do to cheat the hurt. It's what you do to overcome it. And that for me was an important lesson. And you know what? It's not the ghosts in the cave that Aragorn calls to battle's hurt. It's what they do to overcome it. So, guys, give this a try. See what you think. I want to say, again, thank you to everybody. Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.